This video is sponsored by Abacus AI. So far in 2025, about 76,000 people have crossed into the EU. These entries came through 6 main routes, but as usual, the central Mediterranean remains the busiest, with nearly 30,000 people entering the EU that way alone. Now, this still seems like a lot, and it is. But, and this is very important, it's actually down 20% from last year. So that's a clear improvement across most routes. But even though people enter the EU as a whole, they are not distributed equally among member states once they're here. Some countries handle way more asylum applications than others. Take Denmark, around 960 asylum applications in the first half of this year. Now compare that to Germany, over 65,000. Yeah, that's a bit of a difference. So why is migration to Denmark so low? And should the Danish model become the new EU norm? Let's first take a quick look at the numbers. Despite the headlines, Germany hasn't received the most asylum applications this year. That title goes to Spain, which recorded just over 76,000 applications in the first half of 2025. France came in second with 75,000, followed by Germany at 65,000. Then comes Italy with 63,000 and Greece with 28,000. And Belgium and the Netherlands with just over 17,000 each. And as low as Denmark's number is, 960, it's actually not the lowest. Hungary, which sticks to a very strict immigration policy under Viktor Orban, received just 47 applications. Slovakia saw 84. And Lithuania recorded 152. Now, for the eagle-eyed among you, you'll notice the number of asylum applications is much higher than the number of irregular entries we mentioned earlier. That's because many asylum seekers arrive in the EU through legal channels, by plane, ferry, and with a valid visa, and then apply for asylum once they're here. And these cases don't count as irregular crossings. So, that's the big picture in terms of total applications. But since EU countries differ hugely in population, let's also look at asylum applications per capita. And here's where Denmark truly stands out once again. Just 0.4 applications per 1,000 people last year, one of the lowest rates in the EU. So how has Denmark managed to keep its numbers this low? Before we dive into that, a very quick word from our sponsor. Which large language model do you actually use? ChatGPT, super strong when it comes to reasoning and general conversation. DeepSeek, also a great one, especially for coding and research-heavy tasks. Or maybe Gemini, very cool, especially for tasks that require real-world context or visual reasoning. But here's the thing, each of these tools has its own strengths. So if you want the best results, you'd normally have to keep switching between them. Well, not anymore. Our sponsor today, chatllm.abacus.ai, brings all the top AI models together in one single platform. It automatically chooses the best model based on your prompt. You don't have to think about it. You can get access to ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, DeepSeek, Grok 3, and more. And it's not just text. You can generate images and videos too, using models like DALL-E, Recraft, Runway, Luma, and more, all built in. They even have a humanize feature that helps bypass AI detectors and makes AI-generated text sound more human. And the best part? It's all just $10 per month, way cheaper than paying for each tool separately. So visit chatllm.abacus.ai or click the link in the description or in the pinned comment below to check it out. Back to the video. So, Denmark. For years, it's been seen as the black sheep of EU migration policy, not because it's done nothing, but because it's done things very differently. So differently, in fact, that it's now referred to as the Danish model. Take 2016, at the height of the migration crisis. Danish governments actively tried to tackle irregular migration with eye-catching policies. One was the so-called jewelry law, which allowed police to confiscate asylum seekers' cash or valuables worth over 1,300 euros to help cover the costs of their stay. Another was placing newspaper ads in Lebanon, warning that Denmark was tightening its asylum rules. Definitely some out-of-the-box thinking there. But the most significant legal shift came in 2019, when Denmark announced the paradigm shift law. This fundamentally changed what asylum even means in Denmark. Under the new rules, people seeking protection are no longer given a long-term or permanent right to stay. Instead, they receive temporary residence, usually for 1 or 2 years, with regular reviews to see if they still qualify. And Denmark takes those reviews super seriously. In 2021 alone, 453 Syrian refugees had their asylum status revoked. They were then placed in removal centers with limited rights and strict reporting obligations just to leave the facility temporarily. Some ended up leaving Denmark entirely, moving to other EU countries. Refugees are also expected to be financially self-sufficient and return home as soon as possible. You see, in Denmark, refugees aren't future citizens. They're guests, here only as long as their home country is unsafe. The goal is safe return, not integration. Now, it is still possible to obtain permanent residence in Denmark, but it's extremely difficult. Refugees must live in the country for at least 8 years and meet a long list of requirements, passing Danish language tests, showing proof of stable full-time employment for at least 3.5 of the last 4 years, and more. In contrast, in most EU countries, refugee status is long-term and hard to revoke. Therefore, the goal has traditionally been permanent residence, maybe even citizenship. And integration, learning the language, finding a job, joining a community, is central to that process. And the list of tough Danish rules goes on. Take family reunification, for example. If an asylum seeker in Denmark wants to bring their family over, they have to meet a long list of strict requirements. They must be at least 24 years old, be financially self-sufficient, have independent housing, and provide a financial guarantee of 59,000 Danish kroner, roughly 7,700 euros. And then there are very long waiting times. In other words, the system is designed to make family reunification very, very hard to achieve. In Sweden, by contrast, the rules are much more relaxed. For refugees, there's no self-sufficiency requirement, and reunification is allowed from age 21. And it doesn't stop there. In 2021, Denmark became the first European country to formally adopt a plan to outsource asylum procedures to a non-European third country, Rwanda. Under this plan, asylum seekers arriving in Denmark would be flown to Rwanda, where their applications would be processed, not in Denmark and not in the EU. The proposal was eventually shelved, but the idea did not disappear. It just shifted. Instead of pushing for outsourcing at the national level, Denmark set its sights higher, the European level, which we'll come back to later in this video. But first, you might be asking, how is any of this even possible, given the EU's strict asylum rules? Well, it comes down to a legal loophole. Since the 1990s, Denmark has had an official opt-out from the EU's asylum and migration policies. It's the only EU country not bound by the common European asylum system, which means Denmark gets to set its own rules. No need to follow the EU standard. So, this is the Danish model, and it's built on very simple logic. If Denmark becomes a less attractive destination, fewer people will come. And across Europe, that logic is gaining traction. In 2024, 15 countries signed on to Denmark's idea of outsourcing asylum processing to third countries. And most recently, Friedrich Merz joined that list, offering strong vocal support and calling the Danish model the European gold standard. Even the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, recently said, "What has been mainstream among our populations for quite many years is now mainstream for many of us politicians as well." The EU leadership is taking notice too. Ursula von der Leyen has endorsed the idea of outsourcing asylum processing and proposed new regulations to make that easier. The reform includes 4 key changes, the biggest being a redefinition of what counts as a safe third country. Under the new rules, member states could send asylum seekers to any safe country, not just one the asylum seeker has a personal link to. This proposal still needs to be negotiated between the Council of the EU and the European Parliament. The Council looks promising. Most governments seem on board. Plus, Denmark currently holds the Council presidency, and it has made migration a top priority. The real challenge may be the European Parliament, where there's strong resistance from the left-leaning groups, including the left, the Socialists and Democrats, and the Greens. Here's what I think. Left-wing parties are losing ground across Europe, while right-wing parties are gaining traction. Only a few strongholds remain where socialists are still in power: Spain, Lithuania, Slovenia, and yes, Denmark. And here's the surprising part. These tough immigration policies are being pushed through by Denmark's ruling Social Democrats. Not only that, they're polling at the top. To me, this is a very clear message for left-leaning parties across Europe. Stop dying on the migration hill. It's obvious that most Europeans want migration controlled, strictly controlled. Continuing to oppose that reality only fuels the rise of the far right. And when they take power, the very human rights agendas the left cares about may be wiped out completely. Honestly, I see merit in some of the tougher positions. Denmark's approach, temporary residence, offshore asylum processing, and stricter family reunification, make sense. Why not try it? If every asylum seeker can bring their entire family, the numbers will explode. And yes, let's be honest, sham marriages and loopholes exist. So, go Denmark. I hope the EU is paying attention and that the European Parliament doesn't block new laws in this direction. Also, Denmark currently holds the Council of the EU presidency, and while migration's a big part of their agenda, they've got some other bold plans too. We made an entire video on that, so check it out here. And this is the second video in our migration series. The first one was all about immigration from Libya exploding. If you're wondering why and what we can do about it, check it out here. And thank you so much to our presidents: Jan Schauke, Christian Peter, HVD, Daniel Unite Europe, Stefan Mr. Probot, and Rashid. See you in the next video.